Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Think about that for a moment. A space, a tiny moment, a fraction of a second between what happens to you and how you react to it. Most people never notice that space. Someone insults them and they become angry. A problem appears and they become fearful. A setback arrives and they become discouraged. A failure happens and they begin to doubt themselves. They believe life is controlling them when, in reality, their emotions are controlling them. Imagine a captain standing on a ship during a violent storm. The waves are crashing, the wind is roaring, the sky is dark. If the captain panics, the ship is in danger. But if the captain remains calm, focused, and disciplined, the ship can survive the storm. Your life is that ship. Your emotions are the storm. Your mind is the captain. The greatest battles in human history were not fought on battlefields. They were fought within the minds of men and women who refused to surrender to fear, despair, anger, doubt, or uncertainty. Abraham Lincoln faced devastating failures before becoming president. Winston Churchill endured criticism, rejection, and national crisis. Nelson Mandela spent decades in prison. Yet each of them discovered a principle that ordinary people often overlook. Circumstances do not determine destiny. Responses determine destiny. Today we live in a world that encourages emotional reactions. Social media rewards outrage. News feeds amplify fear. Difficulties create anxiety. Failures create insecurity. Many people are highly educated but emotionally undisciplined. They have knowledge but not mastery. They have information but not wisdom. And because of that, their emotions constantly pull them away from their purpose. But there is another way to live, a way where your emotions become servants rather than masters, a way where your mind becomes stronger than temporary feelings, a way where purpose becomes greater than pressure. That is why the title of this message is so important. Train your mind to master the emotions, because the quality of your life will never rise above the quality of your thinking. And until your mind learns to lead, your emotions will continue to control your destiny. Now, remember where we ended in the introduction. We discovered that the quality of your life will never rise above the quality of your thinking. We learned that until your mind learns to lead, your emotions will continue to control your destiny. But that raises an important question. Why is that so difficult? Why do intelligent people make foolish decisions? Why do talented people sabotage their own opportunities? Why do good people repeatedly find themselves trapped in the same cycles of frustration, anger, fear, and regret? The answer is simple yet profound. Because every human being is fighting a battle that nobody else can see. An invisible battle. A battle that takes place not on a battlefield, not in a boardroom, not in a classroom, but inside the mind. Most people spend their lives trying to conquer the world while never learning how to conquer themselves. And that is why they remain prisoners of emotions they were born to master. Let me tell you a story. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a man sat in a tent near a battlefield. Outside, soldiers were preparing for war. The Roman Empire faced threats on every side. Disease was spreading. Political enemies were waiting for opportunities. The future was uncertain. That man was Marcus Aurelius. History remembers him as one of the greatest emperors who ever lived. But what makes his story remarkable is not that he ruled Rome. It is that he understood something far more difficult than ruling an empire. He understood how to rule himself. While others focused on controlling circumstances, Marcus Aurelius focused on controlling his thoughts. In his private journal, later known as Meditations, he repeatedly reminded himself that external events were not the true source of suffering. The real danger was allowing those events to control his mind. Think about that. A man responsible for millions of people understood that the greatest threat to his leadership was not an enemy army. It was an undisciplined mind. That lesson is just as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Because your greatest challenge may not be the economy. It may not be your competitors. It may not even be the obstacles standing in your path. Your greatest challenge may be your response to those obstacles. Someone criticizes you, immediately anger appears. Someone succeeds where you wanted success, immediately jealousy appears. A setback occurs, immediately discouragement appears. A delay happens, immediately frustration appears. The emotion arrives automatically, but what happens next determines everything. This is exactly what Viktor Frankl was talking about when he spoke of the space between stimulus and response. Most people never develop the discipline to live in that space. Instead, they become servants of whatever emotion appears first. And emotions, while powerful, are often poor guides. Fear exaggerates danger. Anger exaggerates offense. Jealousy exaggerates unfairness. Pride exaggerates importance. Emotion can distort reality. This is why Aristotle taught that true excellence involves mastering oneself. He understood that character is not formed by what happens to us. Character is formed by how we respond to what happens to us. And that brings us to a critical leadership principle. Every leader leads from the inside out. Before you can lead a family, you must lead yourself. Before you can lead a business, you must lead yourself. Before you can influence a nation, you must influence yourself. Self-leadership is the foundation of all leadership. Yet we live in a culture that teaches people to follow every feeling. If you feel angry, express it. If you feel discouraged, stop trying. If you feel afraid, avoid the challenge. If you feel uncomfortable, quit. But history tells a completely different story. Theodore Roosevelt once faced tremendous criticism from political opponents and newspapers. Day after day he was attacked. Day after day he was misunderstood. Yet he continued moving forward. Why? Because he understood something that many people never learn. A person's future cannot be built on emotional reactions. It must be built on convictions. Feelings change. Purpose remains. Emotions fluctuate. Principles endure. And when a person learns to anchor their life in principles rather than feelings, they become incredibly powerful. Think about your own life. How many opportunities have been lost because of temporary emotions? How many relationships have been damaged because of uncontrolled reactions? How many dreams have been abandoned because fear spoke louder than purpose? These are difficult questions, but growth begins when we are willing to answer them honestly. Carl Jung once observed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. Many people think fate is controlling them, but often what they call fate is simply an emotional habit they never learned to master. They repeatedly react the same way. They repeatedly think the same thoughts. They repeatedly surrender to the same fears. And then they wonder why their results never change. The truth is that transformation begins the moment awareness begins. The moment you recognize the invisible battle, you gain the power to fight it. The moment you observe your emotions instead of obeying them, you begin taking back control. The moment your mind becomes stronger than your impulses, your future begins to change. That does not mean emotions are bad. Far from it. Emotions are gifts. They provide information. They reveal concerns. They communicate needs. But they were never meant to become masters. They were meant to become servants. A wise person listens to emotions. A mature person learns from emotions. But a disciplined person never allows emotions to become the ruler of their life. And that is the lesson we must carry forward. The invisible battle within every human being is not a battle between success and failure. It is a battle between emotional reaction and intentional response. It is a battle between impulse and wisdom. It is a battle between temporary feelings and lasting purpose. History proves that those who win this battle eventually win many others. So this is why the title of this message matters. This is why train your mind to master the emotions is not merely motivational language. It is a timeless principle of leadership, growth, and success. Because the moment your mind learns to lead, your emotions stop controlling your destiny. But understanding that an invisible battle exists is only the beginning. A deeper question still remains. Where do these emotions get so much power? Why do fear, anger, doubt, and insecurity influence so many decisions? And how can we prevent them from becoming the rulers of our lives? That is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter. In the previous chapter, we discovered that every human being is fighting an invisible battle. We learned that emotions were never designed to become masters. They were meant to become servants. We learned that the difference between a successful life and a frustrated life often comes down to one thing: whether your mind leads your emotions or your emotions lead your mind. But now we arrive at a deeper question. If emotions were never meant to rule us, then why do they seem so powerful? Why can fear stop a dream before it even begins? Why can anger destroy a relationship in a matter of minutes? Why can discouragement convince a talented person to quit? Why can insecurity cause someone to live far below their potential? The answer is because emotions possess something very dangerous when left unchecked. They possess influence, not authority, influence. And many people spend their entire lives confusing the two. Let me explain. Imagine you are driving a car down a long road at night. Suddenly, dark clouds gather overhead. Rain begins to fall. The wind becomes stronger. Visibility decreases. The weather influences the journey. But the weather should never take control of the steering wheel. Yet this is exactly what many people do emotionally. Fear enters their mind, and suddenly fear begins driving. Anger enters their heart, and suddenly anger begins driving. Disappointment appears, and suddenly disappointment determines direction. The emotion becomes the driver instead of remaining a passenger. And whenever feelings become drivers, destiny becomes vulnerable. History provides powerful examples of this truth. During the Great Depression, millions of people across America faced uncertainty unlike anything they had ever experienced. Businesses collapsed. Jobs disappeared. Families struggled to survive. Fear spread throughout the nation. But something fascinating happened. The crisis itself was not the only problem. Fear became a second crisis. People became so overwhelmed emotionally that many lost the ability to think clearly. This is why President Franklin Roosevelt stood before the nation and delivered words that would echo through history. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Notice what he understood. He was not merely addressing economic conditions. He was addressing emotional conditions. He knew that a fearful mind often creates larger problems than difficult circumstances. A person who allows fear to lead them may never start the business, never apply for the opportunity, never pursue the dream, never take the risk, never discover what they were capable of becoming. Fear is powerful, but fear is also deceptive. It often presents imagination as reality. It shows you a future disaster that has not happened and convinces you it already has. This is why Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, observed that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Think about how true that is. How many nights have people lost sleep worrying about something that never happened? How many opportunities have been abandoned because of fears that never became real? How many lives have been limited by emotional assumptions? The tragedy is not that fear exists. The tragedy is when fear becomes a leader. And fear is not the only emotion that attempts to take leadership. Anger does the same. Jealousy does the same. Bitterness does the same. Pride does the same. Each one whispers the same dangerous message: follow me. But emotions make terrible leaders because they focus on the moment, while wisdom focuses on the future. An angry person wants immediate revenge. A wise person considers long-term consequences. A fearful person seeks immediate safety. A wise person seeks long-term growth. A jealous person focuses on another person's success. A wise person focuses on their own development. This difference changes everything. Let me tell you another story. Thomas Edison spent years working on inventions that repeatedly failed. Experiment after experiment produced disappointment. Thousands of attempts led nowhere. Imagine if Edison had allowed his emotions to become his leader. Imagine if frustration had become his advisor. Imagine if discouragement had become his decision maker. The electric light that transformed civilization might never have emerged. But Edison understood a principle that every successful person eventually learns. Temporary emotions should never make permanent decisions. The emotion of failure lasts for a moment. The consequences of quitting can last a lifetime. That is a lesson every listener needs to hear. There will be days when you feel inadequate, days when you feel discouraged, days when you feel rejected, days when you feel uncertain. The question is not whether those emotions will visit you, they will. The question is whether you will offer them leadership. Will you allow them to sit on the throne of your life, or will you acknowledge their presence while refusing to surrender your purpose? That is emotional maturity. That is self-leadership. That is growth. Napoleon Hill spent years studying some of the most successful individuals in history. After observing countless achievers, he discovered something remarkable. Success was not reserved for those with the fewest obstacles. Success belonged to those who learned to maintain control over their thinking despite obstacles. In other words, they mastered their responses. And this is where practical application becomes essential. The next time fear appears, pause before believing it. Ask yourself, is this fact or feeling? The next time anger rises, pause before speaking. Ask yourself, will this reaction help or hurt my future? The next time discouragement visits, pause before quitting. Ask yourself, am I making a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion? Those simple questions can change an entire life. Because emotional mastery is not about eliminating emotions. It is about refusing to surrender authority to them. Emotions are valuable messengers, but messengers were never intended to become kings. And perhaps that is the lesson this chapter has been preparing us to understand. Your emotions are not your enemy, but they are dangerous when given control. Fear can inform you, anger can alert you, disappointment can teach you, but none of them should govern you. History proves that the people who changed the world were not those who never felt fear. They were those who refused to follow fear. They were not those who never felt doubt. They were those who refused to obey doubt. So this is exactly why train your mind to master the emotions is true. This is why train your mind to master the emotions is not simply a motivational statement. It is a leadership principle. Because the moment emotions become leaders, purpose becomes a follower. But when the mind becomes the leader, emotions become valuable servants. And yet, there is still another question we must answer. If emotions should not lead us, then what should? What force is strong enough to rise above fear, doubt, criticism, discouragement, and uncertainty? What gives human beings the power to keep moving forward when every emotion is telling them to stop? The answer lies in one of the most powerful forces known to mankind, purpose. And that is exactly where our journey takes us next. At the end of the previous chapter, we discovered a powerful truth. Emotions have influence, but they should never have authority. Fear can speak, doubt can whisper, discouragement can visit, but none of them should be allowed to sit on the throne of your life. And yet, that realization naturally leads us to an even greater question. If emotions should not lead us, then what should? What force is strong enough to stand against fear? What power can keep a person moving forward when every feeling is telling them to quit? What enables ordinary people to endure extraordinary hardship and still emerge stronger? The answer is purpose. Purpose is one of the most powerful forces ever placed within a human being. Purpose can do what motivation cannot. Purpose can do what talent cannot. Purpose can do what emotion cannot. Because purpose gives meaning to pain. And whenever pain has meaning, it becomes easier to endure. Let me tell you a story. In the darkest days of the Second World War, millions of people found themselves trapped in circumstances they never imagined possible. Among them was a young psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl. Everything familiar was taken from him. His freedom, his possessions, his career, his family, his comfort, his future seemed uncertain. Every day presented suffering. Every day presented loss. Every day presented reasons to give up hope. And yet, after surviving one of history's darkest chapters, Frankl made a remarkable observation. He noticed that some people broke under pressure, while others found the strength to endure. What made the difference? It was not physical strength. It was not intelligence. It was not luck. It was purpose. Those who believed their lives still had meaning often discovered a resilience that surprised even themselves. Years later, Frankl would write one of the most powerful statements ever recorded. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Think about that. A powerful why can survive an almost impossible how. That truth changes everything. Because life will never be free from challenges. There will be disappointments. There will be setbacks. There will be seasons of uncertainty. There will be moments when emotions scream louder than reason. But purpose gives the mind something greater to focus on. Purpose reminds you why you started. Purpose reminds you what matters most. Purpose reminds you who you are becoming. And when purpose becomes clear, emotions begin losing their power. This is why history repeatedly shows us individuals who achieved extraordinary things despite extraordinary difficulties. Consider Abraham Lincoln. Today, history remembers him as one of America's greatest presidents. But before he became a respected leader, he experienced repeated failures. He lost elections, he faced criticism, he endured personal heartbreak. He encountered setbacks that would have convinced many people to quit permanently. Imagine if Lincoln had followed his emotions. Imagine if every disappointment had become a reason to stop. Imagine if every failure had become evidence that he should abandon his mission. History might never have remembered his name, but Lincoln possessed something stronger than temporary feelings. He possessed a purpose larger than his pain, and purpose kept him moving when emotions wanted him to stop. That is one of the greatest lessons of leadership. Leaders are not people who never experience fear. Leaders are people who have discovered something more important than fear. Leaders are not people who never experience doubt. Leaders are people whose purpose is greater than their doubt. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Nothing worth having comes easy." What he understood was that meaningful achievement always requires perseverance. And perseverance is impossible without purpose. Because motivation comes and goes. Emotion rises and falls. Confidence increases and decreases. But purpose remains. Purpose becomes an anchor during storms. Imagine a ship caught in rough waters. The waves are violent, the wind is relentless. Everything appears unstable, but the anchor keeps the ship from drifting away. Purpose functions the same way. The storms of life may shake you, but purpose prevents you from losing direction. This is why so many people struggle emotionally today. They are trying to endure life's storms without an anchor. They are trying to find strength without meaning. They are trying to discover resilience without purpose. And eventually, emotions begin taking control. When people do not know why they are living, every obstacle appears larger. Every setback feels permanent. Every criticism feels devastating. Every delay feels unbearable. But when purpose becomes clear, perspective changes. The obstacle becomes a lesson. The setback becomes preparation. The criticism becomes feedback. The delay becomes development. Nothing changes externally. Everything changes internally. That is the power of purpose. And perhaps nowhere is this principle more visible than in the lives of great inventors, leaders, and visionaries. Thomas Edison's purpose was greater than his failures. Winston Churchill's purpose was greater than opposition. Martin Luther King Jr.'s purpose was greater than threats. Their emotions were real. Their fears were real. Their challenges were real. But their purpose was greater. And because purpose was greater, they continued moving forward. Now let me bring this closer to your own life. Maybe your purpose is to build a business. Maybe it is to provide for your family. Maybe it is to create something meaningful. Maybe it is to serve others. Maybe it is to become the person you were designed to become. Whatever your purpose may be, never underestimate its importance. Because the clearer your purpose becomes, the less power temporary emotions will have over your decisions. The next time fear appears, remember your purpose. The next time discouragement visits, remember your purpose. The next time doubt whispers in your ear, remember your purpose. Do not ask yourself how you feel. Ask yourself why you started. That single question can reignite strength you forgot you possessed. And this is exactly why train your mind to master the emotions is true. Because a mind guided by purpose will always be stronger than emotions guided by circumstances. History proves that train your mind to master the emotions is not merely a motivational phrase. It is a law of personal transformation. Purpose gives the mind authority. Purpose gives direction. Purpose gives endurance. Purpose gives resilience. Purpose allows people to keep moving when emotions tell them to stop. But there is one final lesson we must learn. Knowing your purpose is powerful, yet purpose alone is not enough. Even purpose must be reinforced daily. Even purpose requires discipline. Even purpose requires training, because emotional mastery is not achieved in a single moment. It is developed through daily habits and intentional practice. So the final question becomes, how do we train the mind every day so that purpose remains stronger than emotion? That is exactly what we will discover in the next chapter. And that is why the principle behind train your mind to master the emotions cannot be ignored. Because purpose may reveal the path, but disciplined training is what keeps you walking on it. At the end of the previous chapter, we uncovered a life-changing truth. Purpose is stronger than emotion. We learned that people who discover a compelling reason to live can endure difficulties that would stop others. We learned from Viktor Frankl, Abraham Lincoln, and countless leaders throughout history that purpose gives strength when feelings become weak. But now we arrive at the final lesson of this journey, a lesson that separates inspiration from transformation. Because knowing your purpose is one thing, living it every day is another. Many people discover their purpose. Few people develop the discipline necessary to fulfill it. And that is because purpose may provide direction, but discipline provides progress. Purpose tells you where to go. Discipline determines whether you actually get there. Let me explain it this way. Imagine a young musician who dreams of performing before thousands of people. He can clearly see the vision. He can imagine the audience. He can imagine the success. He can imagine the applause. But imagination alone will never make him a master musician. Every day he must practice. Every day he must improve. Every day he must do things that are often repetitive, uncomfortable, and unseen. The audience sees the performance, but greatness was created in private. The same principle applies to emotional mastery. Many people want confidence. Few people train for confidence. Many people want peace. Few people train for peace. Many people want resilience. Few people train for resilience. What they fail to understand is that emotional strength is not a gift. It is a discipline. And every discipline begins with daily choices. This reminds me of Benjamin Franklin. Few individuals in history were as committed to personal development as Franklin. He understood that success was not built through occasional moments of brilliance. Success was built through consistent habits. He famously kept track of his daily behavior, constantly evaluating where he was, improving, and where he was falling short. Why? Because Franklin understood something that modern society often forgets. You do not become strong by accident. You become strong through training. You do not become wise by accident. You become wise through practice. You do not master emotions by accident. You master emotions through daily discipline. That principle is echoed in the words of Jim Rohn, who said, "Success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day." Think about how powerful that statement is. Not once a year, not when you feel inspired, not when circumstances are perfect, every day. Because emotions are influenced by what we repeatedly think, repeatedly believe, and repeatedly practice. The mind grows wherever attention goes. If you constantly feed your mind fear, fear grows stronger. If you constantly feed your mind negativity, negativity grows stronger. If you constantly focus on problems, problems appear larger. But if you feed your mind purpose, truth, gratitude, and growth, your thinking begins to change. And when thinking changes, emotional responses begin changing as well. That is why emotional mastery is not primarily about controlling emotions. It is about training thoughts. Marcus Aurelius understood this centuries ago. Every morning he prepared his mind before facing the challenges of leadership. He expected difficulties. He expected criticism. He expected obstacles. But because he prepared his thoughts beforehand, he was less likely to become controlled by his emotions when difficulties appeared. Preparation created stability. And that is a lesson every listener can apply immediately. Do not wait until a crisis arrives before strengthening your mind. Train before the storm. Athletes train before competition. Soldiers train before battle. Pilots train before emergencies. Why should personal growth be any different? If you want emotional strength tomorrow, you must train mentally today. And what does that training look like? Sometimes it is as simple as pausing before reacting. Someone says something offensive. Your emotions demand an immediate response, but your mind says, wait. That pause is training. Sometimes it means refusing to entertain destructive thoughts. Sometimes it means choosing gratitude when complaints would be easier. Sometimes it means continuing forward despite fear. Sometimes it means keeping commitments when emotions are trying to negotiate an escape. Each moment becomes a workout for the mind. And just like physical exercise strengthens muscles, these daily decisions strengthen character. This is where many people misunderstand success. They admire great leaders, they admire great entrepreneurs, they admire great thinkers, but they often overlook what created that greatness. It was not one dramatic moment. It was thousands of disciplined moments, thousands of choices, thousands of decisions to remain faithful to purpose despite emotional resistance. Winston Churchill did not become resilient overnight. Thomas Edison did not become persistent overnight. Abraham Lincoln did not become courageous overnight. They developed strength through repeated acts of discipline. And that same process is available to every person listening right now. You do not need extraordinary circumstances to strengthen your mind. You only need today's opportunities, today's challenge, today's decision, today's choice. Every day provides another chance to train. Every frustration becomes practice. Every delay becomes practice. Every disappointment becomes practice. Every criticism becomes practice. Life itself becomes the training ground. And slowly, almost invisibly, something remarkable begins happening. The mind becomes stronger. The emotions become more disciplined. Purpose becomes clearer. Character becomes deeper, and reactions become responses. This is how transformation occurs, not through one emotional speech, not through one moment of inspiration, but through daily obedience to principles. That is why history proves that train your mind to master the emotions is true, because the people who changed their lives first changed their habits. The people who changed their habits changed their thinking. And the people who changed their thinking changed their destiny. So that's why train your mind to master the emotions is not merely advice. It is a blueprint for growth. It is a blueprint for leadership. It is a blueprint for fulfillment. Throughout this journey, we have learned that there is an invisible battle within. We learned that emotions make terrible leaders. We discovered that purpose is stronger than temporary feelings. And now we understand that purpose must be reinforced through daily discipline. This chapter brings all the pieces together, because emotional mastery is not an event, it is a lifestyle. It is a daily commitment to think higher than your feelings, live according to your purpose, and respond according to wisdom rather than impulse. And now, having completed this journey, we stand at the doorstep of the final conclusion. The question is no longer whether emotional mastery is possible. The question is whether you will choose it, because the future you desire is waiting on the other side of a disciplined mind. And that is why the principle behind train your mind to master the emotions cannot be ignored. It is one of the greatest laws of personal transformation.